Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Speaker.
John from the 58th, Cole.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to make just a couple points on this bill. First, I should probably share with you, my brother passed away. He died of Ewing sarcoma. He lost his leg, his full right leg, and his hip whenever he was 15 years old. Had a couple ongoing battles, but he passed away. Lived sometime after surgeries, but passed away Ewing sarcoma. And I would share with you.
No, the first hour was basically all four.
Heard here today, marijuana does not cure.
They've been talking about this since right around noon.
It may provide some relief, but don't be misled to think that marijuana cures cancer in some way. Second, there's been great debate here today about the DEA classification, and I think we're missing something. There are two standards to the DEA federal classification.
That's why I'm reporting it.
Number one is the medical properties. That's only one of the standards. Either it has no currently accepted medical use, which would be Schedule 1, that's currently accepted medical use, or it does. If it has a currently accepted medical use, it could be Schedule 4. But that's not all. There's another part to it. The other part that we're missing is there's a high potential of abuse or a low potential of abuse. If there's a low potential of abuse, it can be Schedule 4. If there's a high potential for abuse, it's Schedule 1. Are you really thinking that people aren't going to smoke dope and put it in 4? Part of the reason, my friends, that it is Schedule 1 and is having such a struggle to get what I believe there probably are good medical uses to some forms of marijuana, part of the reason it's struggling is because of the high abuse of people smoking dope to catch a buzz and get stoned. It can't be Schedule 4. We would be saying there is a low potential for abuse for marijuana. And that's just not so. I would also agree with the chairman. 28 states have not done this. They have not done this. This is just throwing chaos into the whole system. This entire scheme is missing, is what the chairman said, and I agree. The delivery system, the dispensary system, the prescription system, the revenue system, all missing if we just reclassify it as this amendment seeks to do. There's confusion, uncertainty, an inability to actually use it. It puts the legal medical issues in limbo in West Virginia. Those are the reasons that we should not consider this to be good policy or good procedure to just reclassify it. Doesn't matter where your position is on the policy. This is bad procedure. And I would suggest to you that it is not proper to go from Schedule 1 to Schedule 4 and say there is a low potential of abuse of marijuana. It's just not so. Two standards, medical issue and a low issue of abuse, that's Schedule 4. No accepted medical use and a high likelihood of abuse, that's Schedule 1. Two standards, and we just simply cannot, in good conscience, move it to Schedule 4, even if it were a good policy procedure, which it's not. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, for all those reasons, despite where you might be on this issue, I would urge a no vote on the amendment.
To the members, we've had, I think, very spirited debate today. The people that have pushed their buttons, each of which are still on the list, have already spoken on the bill. So I would ask you to be brief in your comments. I will recognize you again under our rules. People can be recognized twice to speak, but after you speak the second time, I would remind you that the rule is that you are permitted to speak twice. So I'm going to recognize the people who have already spoken, whose lights are on, and then I'm going to go to the gentleman from the third to close debate.
From the counter arguments.
Gentleman from 36, Dr. Rowe, has not spoken, and he has just asked to be recognized.
I'm trying. I think we've had 19 talk and 3 against, 16 for, but I'm not 100% sure. And we just lost audio. Hold on, I'm trying. I have no idea why we lost audio.
In regard to the scheduling of the drugs, we're not having the discussion on an agenda in any of the three committees to which the system bill has been referred.
Amen, Ro.
We're halfway through the session. A triple reference at this point is almost impossible because we can't take up House bills in the last week or so of the session. So we're down to an absolute time crunch. And if folks are saying...
Well, they haven't officially voted yet.
Let's have that bill, then that bill should have been on the leadership agenda a good while ago. And it just hasn't happened. And, you know, and the gentleman who's the chair of two of the three committees...
I think the point of this is to reschedule to schedule forward, create a huge mess, and force the committees to actually have to create the backbone, which would be Senate Bill 386 or the House bill that Pushman voted forward.
I urge people to understand that your vote in favor of this amendment will be a very clear statement that the agenda on the committees, the three committees that have that bill, should take up the bill and deal with it as in the normal course of events. A vote against this amendment, on the other hand, is really a statement that we're just going to do what we've always done and keep Frankenstein in the castle. We have got to start discussing this. Our constituents expect us to do this, to take it up, to look at it honestly and carefully, and proceed on it. I think that it's being challenged, the amendment's being challenged, not just on its merits.
I don't think they'll even vote, to be honest. But
that we're somehow discussing here
I'm intrigued.
On the floor, and it might involve special rules. That
this wasn't supposed to turn into a debate like this.
That can be done for any
this is just a second reading.
Prescription drug that we might have. So I would urge the members to understand that this is a historic day that we would discuss the legalization of marijuana on this floor. It's very unusual and only comes about as an amendment to a standard bill that we pass each year. I urge folks to vote in favor of the amendment if it's your position that you favor the legalization of medical marijuana. Now, it's still a controlled substance. As I understand it, it will be dealt with and can be dealt with in the criminal system as a controlled substance. But remember, we have to trust our physicians to make the prescriptions. That's what medical marijuana is about, is are we going to trust our physicians to make prescriptions? And as I've said before, you know, we have allowed two monopolies for intoxicants in West Virginia. One is to the alcohol industry and the other is to the pharmaceutical industry. They control anything that would intoxicate or relieve pain. Medical marijuana is just a third possibility. And we're going to have it developed and prescribed by professionals who prescribe opiate drugs every day to deal with medical marijuana where it's appropriate. And let me just say that it's I think, a challenge for all of us to make sure that on the agenda of the committees, and it's my understanding the committee references were to substance abuse, very appropriate, health, very appropriate, and ultimately judiciary. And that bill should be moving in those committees. And a vote today in favor of this amendment is a vote that, yes, let's look at this fairly and honestly. Let's take up the bill. Let's take up any considerations about special systems or special controls. Let's do it, and let's do it this session. So I urge my colleagues to vote in favor of the amendment. And I just want to say that my vote today, I dedicate to the delegate from Monongalia County who was here a year ago, and also all of my friends who have cancer and who will get cancer. Thank you.
John from 26, Doug Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's a wise old saying that the speaker sows and the listener reaps. I've reaped a lot today. I'm no expert on this.
At times, man, I wish I was. I was sent up here by people that I would argue are not experts, or the vast majority are not experts in this. I think the question before us is to move it from Schedule 1 to Schedule 4. And as I've read today, Schedule 1 simply means no medical benefit. I would argue that there's a lot of those non-experts out there all across the United States that have gotten relief from using cannabis. Schedule 4 requires a prescription. When I go to the doctor and my doctor writes a prescription for whatever ails me, I believe that he does that knowing full well that it will do benefits to me. It will help me. I think if we do this and we wait on the Board of Pharmacy to say, you know, it's okay or whatever, I don't know exactly, again, how that worked. Maybe I didn't read enough there. But if my doctor writes me a prescription, certainly he's had the training and the professional development to be able to make that informed decision. I've read a few terms, crime approach and medical approach, and I think we have to stay away from the crime part of this right now, and we have to look at the benefits. The benefits, I think, you watch the evening news and you'll see person after person talk about how they have been helped by this. My mom died of cancer. Sat beside her bed, pushed a button every 15 minutes to give her some relief from using morphine. She never regained consciousness when we started that. I would like to think that if this were available, it could have helped her in some way. We need to keep in mind that many, many drugs are abused. And if a drug is out there, someone's going to find a way to abuse it. If it's OxyContin, it's Schedule 1, it's written with a prescription, it gets abused. Someone will find a way. The old saying that locks are for honest people, in this case, I think it applies. What we do today will be groundbreaking. Whether it's done by the 28 states or not, I don't know. Again, I confess that I'm not an expert. I've done some Googling sitting here while I listened and read. And I based upon that, I feel that I have to vote for this amendment. It has nothing to do with my party. It has everything to do with what's right. If there's one person that gets helped by this, then I will sleep tonight with my vote. Mr. Speaker, thank you very much.
John for 37th, Delegate Pushkin.
Very much for recognizing me. Again, I'll try to keep it as brief as possible. I'll try to speak quickly. I just want to answer some of the things that were brought up, just basically reply to them. First of all, it has never been stated that there is a cure for cancer. Unfortunately, we all know there is no cure for cancer. What it is used for, it has been used for a long time, is to help people gain an appetite when they're going through chemotherapy, which can extend their life and add comfort when they're going through a very trying time. Nobody's ever said there was a cure for cancer. We know, unfortunately, we've all been touched by cancer in here, and there is no cure for it. It's a treatment for people when they're going through chemotherapy, as well as some other treatments. There are treatments that are used in cancer. Also, is that at a Schedule 4 non-narcotic is for someone with a low potential for abuse relative to substances in Schedule 3. That's why it would go in Schedule 4. I just remind the body that Xanax is a Schedule 4 non-narcotic. Xanax is one of the deadliest drugs that is overprescribed in this state. If you check the toxicology reports through accidental overdose deaths, you will find Xanax quite prevalent in the toxicology reports. And there's never been a fatal overdose from cannabis. Also, I believe the gentleman from the 32nd was referring to the Rocky Mountain High Intensity Drug Trafficking Report, which I was also there for. It was a joint committee on the judiciary when that report was was brought to this body here in West Virginia. And so I looked it up after hearing that report, and that report has been debunked by at least 5 publications, one of which being Forbes magazine. One of the problems with that report is it uses a very small sample size, and then misstated some of their findings, like, for example, the higher rates of traffic fatalities. Well, actually, states that have some form of decriminalized cannabis have dropped, their traffic fatalities have dropped. And that's according to the American Journal for Public Health. It's a peer-reviewed study right here. I don't know why, but states that have some form of decriminalized cannabis have lower traffic fatality rates. Don't ask me why, but that's stated from the American Journal for Public Health. Also in the American Journal for Public Health is where I found that opioid usage rates drop in states that have some form of decriminalized medical cannabis. In fact, it was stated earlier, 25% less fatal overdoses in these states. 25% less. That's a big number. And I don't want to be too anecdotal. I said I wasn't going to take up much time, but it's one story I want to relate quickly. And all the emails and phone calls that I've gotten since I first introduced a bill similar to this during the special session last year, one that really stands out was from a gentleman, I can't say his name, but he served this country in the United States Navy. He was stationed on the USS Cole. Was attacked by Al-Qaeda. He was on the ship when it was attacked. He was close enough to sustain many bodily injuries, as well as, I'm sure, mental injuries as well. When he came home through the VA, he was prescribed a laundry list of medications, and he got addicted to some of these medications, and he weaned himself off of it, and now treats himself with medical cannabis. And this guy's a hero. Okay, if any of these bills ever made it onto a committee agenda, I would bring him up here to speak to that committee. Hasn't made it on an agenda yet. If we were able to discuss it in a committee, this guy would be glad to come up and speak to you. But what this amendment would do would protect him. If he happened to be caught with this on his person, something that he was being used, a hero was using to treat his own ailments, something he used to get off of this laundry list that he was addicted to upon his return from his service to this country. If he was caught with it, this would simply protect him by lowering the schedule. Schedule 4, non-narcotic. It would protect this hero.
Jump from 16th, Doug Hornbuckle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In a very quick attempt to educate our body in reference to the report that my colleague from the 37th and the 32nd were referencing, those folks with the Rocky High will not release their academic qualifications. You can make your own assumption about that, why they won't do that. Also, in the toxicology reports, we never, ever, ever talk about any other substance that was used in all those incidents with driving, and there were various other substances. Also, the DEA does not forbid people from buying actual poisonous plants. They don't. And the point I'm going to go to really quick here is 80,000 Americans on an annual basis are poisoned by simple plants. Simple plants that we would assume not to use. Outside, there are pokeberries, wisteria, Christmas rose, castor beans, and hemlock, which killed Abraham Lincoln's mother. Around your house, there's pothos, peace lily, calla lily, Easter lily, rubrum lily, tiger lily, day lily, Asian lily, oleander, and caladium. And from an educational standpoint, the point here is that obviously we assume that our kids are not going to eat those things. And by being parents, from a youth standpoint, we're not going to let our children smoke. If we don't educate people on actual poisonous plants, but we vilify marijuana, are we truly concerned about protecting our kids? So in closing, I trust my prosecutors, my law enforcement, my physicians, and our parents. Thank you.
Lady from 31st, Doug Arbonne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just decided at the last minute to stand up and speak for just a minute. I've got a different perspective on this than I've heard here today. For 20 years, I was a social worker. I've worked in various drug rehabilitation facilities, and only 3 years ago worked with a couple in Beckley. And I think we need to think about, what do these people who are fighting this problem every day think about this? They're opposed to this, overwhelmingly opposed to this. And I've talked to several of them in the last week. Taking marijuana and putting it on a Schedule 4, allowing our doctors to prescribe it, we don't even know what doctors, we're not saying what doctors can prescribe it. And my husband's a doctor. I know he's not for this. He doesn't want that burden. I don't think that the other delegate in our body's for it either. We would like to have some parameters there. Which doctors can prescribe this? Maybe there are some doctors, cancer doctors, doctors who deal with neurology, who are able to do that and should be able to do that, but this amendment is not the place to open this up at. Every single drug addict that I've dealt with in my 20-some years have all said they started on marijuana. Everyone. So the argument that this is not a gateway drug is false. That doesn't mean everyone who uses marijuana is an addict. So we need to make that differential there. But I just thought it was important to let everyone know that we've got a group of people out there in the state fighting our drug problem, which is the highest in the nation, who are opposed to this amendment today. And where I do feel like it has some medicinal purposes for certain things, this amendment is not the place to do that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Jump to 25th, Doug Painter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll make this brief. After listening to everybody talk, I do rise in support of the amendment. Thank you.
Hey, you're Republican.
House Bill Order. Gentleman from the 63rd, Doug Folk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And because of some of the comments made, I think it's important that I point out one study, peer-reviewed, from the U.S. This is in relation to how it could be used potentially in the future for cancer treatments. Its cannabinoid inhibits proliferation of breast cancer cells. Bear with me because this might be hard. Sean D. McAllister, scientist at California Pacific Medical Center Research Institute, stated the following in their August 2011 study titled Pathways Mediating the Effects of Cannabinoid Oil on the Reduction of Breast Cancer Cell Proliferation, Invasion, and Metastasis. That was published in the Breast Cancer Research and Treatment Journal. There is a general consensus in the field of cancer research that targeting multiple pathways that control tumor progression is the best strategy for the eradication of aggressive cancers. Since CBD has a low toxicity, it would be an ideal candidate for the use in combination treatments with additional drugs already used in the clinic. Importantly, CBD appears to be interacting through a cellular system that regulates the expression of key transcriptional factors, for example, ID1, that control breast cancer proliferation, migration, and invasion. The experiments described in this manuscript not only define the pathways that CBD is working through to control breast cancer aggressiveness, but also demonstrate the efficacy of CBD in preclinical models. A greater understanding of this system may lead to future therapies for breast cancer patients, including the additional refinement of CBD analog synthesis. I'm not willing to wait. I've had a mother with breast cancer. She came down with breast cancer when we were pregnant with her first child. It metastasized about 4 years after she was diagnosed. I'm tired of waiting for a federal government to legalize something that my mother has told me, and we privately talked. She was totally against it 15 years ago. I was probably totally against it 5 or 7 years ago. I've done enough research that I think people should be allowed, and in this case, with the consent of their doctor, to decide what to put in their bodies.
We keep hearing that it has no medical use. That's a peer-reviewed study that's printed in a breast cancer research journal. How many people are going to stand up here and keep saying that there's no research?
I bet nobody after that.
I wonder how many more people hit their button after I said all that. I'm tired of waiting for the federal government to tell us what we can put in our bodies. Thank you.
John, for the 14th, I got Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a couple of points. I've been doing some research as the discussion's going on here. And I thought this was pretty interesting and thought others might want to hear this. So why hasn't the FDA done more, or why hasn't the FDA rescheduled marijuana? Well, this report says, unlike drugs approved by the Food and Drug Administration, dispensary marijuana has no quality control, no standardized composition or dosage for specific medical conditions. It has no prescribing information or no high-quality studies of effectiveness or long-term safeties. So everyone here knows that I'm not a doctor. I'm sure the doctor probably knows more about what all that means. But in simple terms, I think there was a question earlier. So how do you prescribe it? How do you know how much to give? How many joints are you going to tell somebody that they can smoke and still be in a safe range? So those are all questions that, again, the FDA exists for a reason, and I certainly can see further reason to examine this and to study it, but again, I don't think this is the right place to do it. And also, as a small business owner, this is changing the subject just a little. Let's say I hire somebody to drive a truck. I chain a dozer, a 30-ton bulldozer onto a semi-tractor trailer, or a 20-ton dozer, and send them down the road. We're required to drug test drivers. So how is this all going to work? And let's say I have somebody, I also cut timber occasionally. Let's say I have somebody in the woods cutting a tree. Now, they're not required to take a drug test. Do I send fellow workers out in the woods to cut trees down where you have the possibility of a tree falling on their head from somebody, with still has the effects of using marijuana, whether it be medical or otherwise? So I think those are things we need to consider. I'll be voting against the amendment. Not saying there's not a possibility of good effects from medical marijuana, but I just don't think we're ready to make that decision right now. I'm not anyway. Thank you.
John, for the 27th, I'll get shot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've heard a lot of anecdotes today. I'm going to share one with you that it's going to be unlike the other anecdotes you've heard. Doesn't involve anybody that was suffering from anything. It just involves what I saw when I was visiting my younger son who lived in California for a couple of, probably 5 years. This was probably 6 to 8 years ago, and he lived in Los Angeles. At that time, medical marijuana was legal, but the state had not approved recreational marijuana. On one afternoon, we went to a place called Venice Beach, which some people referred to in those days as Muscle Beach. And if you've watched any TV shows, you've probably seen this area where people are skating down the sidewalks in their bikinis or swimsuits. Anyway, we were walking down the boardwalk there, and I noticed on one side, there's shops are lined on one side and the ocean's on the other side. And there was a shop that called itself a clinic, and beside it was a shop that called itself a dispensary. And I didn't think anything of it. We went to the next block and saw the same sort of configuration. And on the third block where I saw this, I asked my son what this was all about. And he said, that's where you go get your prescription for medical marijuana. And I said, no, it can't be that easy. He said, oh, yeah, it is. So we sat down on the bench. I was really curious, and I started watching. And right in front of the clinic was a fellow who stood out there sort of passing out flyers. And I watched that he would hand a flyer to somebody, and then the person would go into the clinic and then come out. They'd go next door to what was, I think, called a dispensary, and they'd come out with a bag. And that went on for a while, and I got really curious as to what the guy was handing out. So I walked up to him, and I said, can I have one of those? And he said, sure. And he handed me a card, and it said, this is a medical clinic. Don't ask for marijuana unless you have these symptoms. Don't ask for a prescription. I thought, well, that's pretty subtle. Now, what moron couldn't figure out what they'd have to tell the doctor to get their prescription? So we sat there for, I guess, close to 30 minutes, and I counted 25 or so people that went into the clinic, and every one of them came out with a piece of paper and went next door into the dispenser. Now, I can't tell you that could happen here. Okay, I'm not going to predict that. I'm just going to tell you it became a joke. Medical marijuana became a joke in California and ultimately evolved into recreational marijuana. So if you're a fan of recreational marijuana, this is probably a good story. It probably gives you encouragement. Recreational marijuana, and I can't say that's going to happen here, but I'll tell you what we have seen in southern West Virginia. We've seen pill mills. We've seen people who claim to be doctors that in order to earn a large amount of money will write a prescription for opioids to anybody, just about anybody that comes in. Those places, a lot of them, fortunately, have been busted. But a lot of the misery that we see in southern West Virginia is
and he's the chair of the Judiciary Committee that any bill in the House has to go through.
I can't predict with any degree of certainty
That's who's
what's
in
going to
charge.
happen here because of how uncertain and confusing this whole process will be upon if we adopt this amendment. I can tell you that's a possibility. And that's one reason I'm going to vote no.
John from the third to close debate.